So it's like the
Alright.
first question. Oh, there you go. That's being live streamed now. It's like the first question that you get in Melbourne, isn't it?
Yeah, who do you follow? Yeah. It's a great, it is an important question. So Jen raised her hand. Jen, did you want to tell us who you supported? I don't know. Hands down, that's all right.
We can't take people off mute in the webinar, can we?
Technically, but that's all right. We'll just listen to the sound.
Tell us who you support in the chat if you'd like, Jen. That's why you're raising your hand.
I'll give it another, I reckon, I just noticed it's just past 2 o'clock here in Australia. I'll give it another 10, 20 seconds or so before we kick off. From Sydney, it has to be the Swans. Yeah, that makes sense. I'll play that.
Yeah.
I used to live up not in Sydney, but not too far from Sydney, and it was an interesting experience being just about the only AFL fan that didn't go for the Swans up there, particularly when the Blues were not so good. But that's all right. That's my burden to bear.
You get born into who you barrack for, isn't it? You don't really have a choice.
Great shout, Elliot. It is Blues year. Thanks, mate. All right.
Is that our Elliot that's in the chat?
It is our Elliot, yeah.
Good to see you joining us, Elliot.
All right. Well, it's just
Should we get started?
Yeah, 1 minute past. I reckon we'll kick things off for today. And thanks everyone for joining us for our webinar on the 5 long-term trends every graduate employee should know. Before I go any further, though, I would like to acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which we all meet here today. For me, here in the city of Melbourne, that is the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung peoples of the East Kulin Nation. I would also like to pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And kia ora koutou for my Kiwi friends from across the ditch, including, I'm not your Kiwi, Grant, but you're joining us from across the ditch as well. So welcome to everyone today. Let's jump into it, I reckon. Grant, do you want to flick through the next couple of slides?
If my mouse starts working, yes.
High tech, high tech here. Cool. Well, for introducing today's speakers, for those of you that don't know us, Grant, if you want to go to the next slide, I'm joined here by Grant Robson, who is our VP of Sales, as I mentioned before, based in Auckland, and with Prosper for a long time now, pretty much, Grant.
5 years?
Yeah, 5 years or so. And for those of you who don't know me, I can see a lot of my clients actually in the chat, and I'm really surprised you want to hear from me yet again. Thought you'd be a bit sick of my voice, but my name's Sam, and I'm the Enterprise Partnerships Manager here at Prosper. But welcomes aside, let's jump into the crux of what you're all here to hear about today, which is a little bit of insight to some of the long-term trends that are starting to influence the grad market. As I'm sure many of you are feeling and are aware right now, it is a tough year in the grad recruitment market. I'm sure those of you who don't have the campaign open, you might have started to hear that. And for those of you who do have your campaigns opening or are currently opened or just closed, if you're feeling it, the pinch for the most part. That's the consistent trend that I'm hearing from a lot of the people we're speaking to at the moment. So typically what we do is we look at a bit of a rundown of how things are going in roughly May. And so we thought we'd actually bring it forward this time and do it while a lot of you are still actually open right now, just because of it's the seismic change we've seen in the last even 12 months or so. So to step through it, let's start with yourselves, actually, with a bit of an analysis on the number of grad employers there are out there. And there are a lot of you. We did a bit of an analysis last year. Those of you who might have joined our AAGE presentation, you might have seen this particular graph. And this is Australia specific, this graph here. But we've seen a roughly 36% increase in the number of full AAGE employer members from 2015 to 2021. So a huge increase. This is also reflected in our own data as well. So each year, as I'm sure many of you are aware, Prosper publishes a top 100, both in Australia and New Zealand. How we rank that top 100, we find as definitive a list as possible of all of the employers across the country, across Australia and across New Zealand, who've hired graduates in the last 12 months. when we sort of, so we look at our platforms, look at competitive platforms, Grad Connection and your Next Step, look at your Seek, your Indeed, everywhere we can potentially find to try and find a list of everyone who was recruited. In 2020, 2021's top 100, which was taken over a period of 2020 data, it was about 572 employers in Australia, whereas there was about 246 in New Zealand. For our most recent released top 100, which was collected data from 2021, there was 796 employers in Australia who were nominated, 32% increase, huge number, and even bigger in New Zealand as well, 70% increase, up to 514, almost as many was in Australia the previous year. Huge increase. Anecdotally, we haven't obviously finalized the data for this year so far. It's a thing that we do over the course of 12 months. I would not be surprised in Australia that is at least in Australia, that's a very, very similar trend, and probably in New Zealand as well. And Grant, you probably could seen some similar stuff in New Zealand yourself, Grant, like probably similar.
Definitely. Yeah, there's been a huge increase in the amount of employers that are hiring in the grad space, and even SMEs are reaching out to us now and just looking to hire 1 to 2 interns per year, whereas previously they weren't in this space.
Which is fantastic for students, but obviously adds a bit more competition in the market.
Makes everyone's job a little bit more tricky and interesting. That's on call today, that's for sure.
Most definitely. And then, so there's more of you, right? Well, how about the number of roles you're hiring for? So if we go to the next slide, a recent released AAGE report, so again, this is Australia specific, found that of employer respondents, 56% of you are hiring more students compared to last year. And last year was actually a bumper year as well. I think last year was our biggest size that we've seen in the longest time as well. So 56% of you are hiring more than last year, which is crazy. We're doing a bit of an analysis at the moment, trying to work out the exact number of additional roles that we've seen across the wider possible platforms, which will probably conclude after April. But it's been a huge increase. In fact, if we go to the next slide, Grant, I would like to ask everyone who's on the call with us today, just anecdotally, are you increasing your graduate and intern intake? And let me just quickly launch a interactive poll, and hopefully that's all up there for you. And yeah, just let us know. Are you hiring? If you are hiring, are you hiring slightly more, maybe significantly more? Have you doubled your program intake? Anecdotally, I'm definitely hearing there's a lot more employees hiring a lot more. So very curious to see how this comes, and pretty solid amount of responses coming in so far, Grant. I think it's just shy of 70% of respondents so far. Looks like it's slowing down. I reckon if you haven't done it yet, 5 more seconds. Otherwise, I'm closing it off. And cool. Let's have a look. Should share results. Hopefully, chat out if you can all see. Can't see that, but yeah, majority of you, if not, 25% of you are keeping it about the same, 2% a bit less than that, but a vast majority are hiring more than last year, with some doubling. If you feel comfortable, for those who have joined us, let us know your hiring size as well in the chat, particularly for those who have said they're doubling. Like, have you doubled from 5 to 10, or is it more like from 500 to 1,000? Like, what's the, maybe let us know if you feel comfortable in the chat. But
you could go anonymous, just to make sure you're not giving away any trade secrets, how many grads you're hiring.
But yeah, so in short, I mean, as we can see from this and even from that AAGE data as well, quite often, a majority of you are hiring more students, a lot more students. So there's more of you, and you're hiring more as well. How about we look at the supply of students as well? So what we've seen from the last few years, and to note this again, this data is Australian. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the data for New Zealand at this stage, but we are seeing very, very similar trends in New Zealand as well. We just couldn't get the hard numbers. But what we've seen is a decline in the number of graduating students, the number of students who are completing their degree and coming out of university. It's worth flagging this data. So it's about 2.5% drop in number of graduating domestic students year on year from 2019 to 2020. And that's a really important point. This data is from the end of 2020, when we're just in those early days of the pandemic. Victoria's obviously hit quite hard, but most other states were relatively well open. Our expectation is this has gotten worse across 2021 as well. But unfortunately, we are limited by what is publicly available at this point in time in that. So there's less students coming out of university. Potentially, is this a short-term trend? Well, we're looking also at the commencement rate of students starting their degree in Australia. Grant, if you want to jump to the next slide. What we've seen is that the growth rate of university students enrolling, again, particularly in Australia, is at its lowest since about 2005. And in fact, there was about a 1.5% year-on-year decrease in the number of students enrolling into university courses compared to that previous year. Again, I would anticipate that has gotten worse. That does remain to be seen. So in short, there's, again, summarizing every of these key points, there's more of you, you're hiring significantly more, and there are less students coming out of university, and potentially this might be a bit of a long-term trend as well, as less students re-enroll. So less students coming out of university. What about those who are actually looking to enter the job market? Well, what we're seeing is a lot of this is quite anecdotal at this point in time from what we're hearing directly from students, but it does look like there are significantly less students who are finishing their degree and actually entering the job market. So we've actually seen a huge increase, and this is a global trend, but particularly in Australia, an increase in the number of people enrolling in postgraduate and master's degrees. Even from our own data, for those that you aren't aware, Prospel runs a study platform called Postgrad Australia, a couple other sort of platforms similar where we advertise master's courses and postgrad courses. We've seen a 3 times increase in the number of the traffic on those sites over the last 2 years, or so last year particularly. So huge increase in that, which is incredible. Anecdotally, also talking directly to students, and I've heard this from the stuff that we're doing directly with students and what employers are saying when they speak to students at virtual fairs and physical fairs and things like that. There does seem to be a market increase in the number of students who are very keen to go do some travel after we've been locked in the country for the last 2 years. And personally, I completely understand. I'm very keen to get overseas at the earliest opportunity. I think we even got one of our account managers. He's flying to Bali for a few months on Sunday. Shout out to Elliot. So we get it, right? Like, I think you're all feeling that as well. It's like there's just a lot going on, and we want to do that. That's not even to mention, how students want to earn income these days. I think that's changed quite dramatically. We're seeing a lot more of an entrepreneurial generation who are potentially looking to start their own startup or make income in alternative ways, whether it be day trading maybe, or streaming, or what have you, starting a YouTube channel. Who knows? Like, it's probably not a huge proportion of them, but it's significant enough with all of these factors at once to indicate there's less students who are actually ready to enter the job market. That's not alone. So that's the job market, let alone the graduate jobs market. So we did some analysis on Google search trends quite recently for graduate jobs, internships, other variations of that, graduate programs, things like that. And in both Australia and New Zealand, trend was probably slightly worse in Australia, but both countries had this very similar trend. There has been a decrease in the number of searches on Google for graduate programs and internships, like quite significantly as well from that peak. Now, that doesn't tell the full picture, of course, because, way people search on Google's changed over that period of time. Grad Australia, Grad New Zealand, over that same period of time has gone significantly up in traffic as well. Got different university platforms and the like as well, but there is something underlying here that we're trying to get to the bottom with, and Grant will talk a little bit on it in a tick as well, in direct discussions with students and the like, but there is a trend where there's students looking outside of the traditional graduate program internship sort of pathway out of university. Because a final point on all of this as well is in regards to the students who are entering the graduate jobs market. So for the students who are like, okay, yep, all those factors aside, I've come out of university, I'm ready to look for a job. They are realizing that they have options. They're seeing that there's 1,200 jobs on Grad Australia in the peak of March. They're hearing across the platform that they see it. Like there's just this dearth of opportunity at the moment, and they're being picky. They're being picky. We've seen the application rate, for example, with students has declined significantly. 25% drop in the number of job applications that they're making, which means, say, in 2021, the AAG data sort of pointed to the fact that your average student makes about 9 job applications or so. That's shrunk down to more like the 7-ish range as well. So in short, if we summarize all again, there's more of you. You're hiring significantly more positions, more students. There are less students, less commencing students as well. So it's a bit of a long-term trend there. There's less of them entering the jobs market, let alone entering the graduate jobs market. And for those that do, a shrunken pool, a shrunken pool of candidates, they're applying for less jobs and they're being picky. So I guess that's a little bit of context from us about what's happening at the market as of right now. We're very curious because obviously we try to get as much of a full picture as possible. We don't see every part. So I guess, is there anything that you think else is going on there, that anything else you're hearing directly from students, or if you're a university you're seeing, anything else we might have missed there? And please write in the chat if so.
And just to answer a couple of questions in the chat, Sam, whilst we've got a intermission and getting some feedback from what employers are, what else employers are hearing. Mm-hmm. Whitney asked around the slides. We'll definitely be sharing this slide deck with you all afterwards. We'll also be including some additional data into it as well, which we're just fetching on the total number of opportunities open on our platform right now in comparison to other years as well. So we'll get that over to you. When next, well, maybe not on the next day or so, because we're all heading away for the long weekend in a few hours, or an hour or so in New Zealand. So early next week.
Fantastic. There was a question about, actually, I've just sent from Lala, that why we think there's a decrease in the number of university student enrollments. Do you have any thoughts on that, Grant, before we jump through?
It's a great question. And I think we'd just be hypothesizing. We don't know the answer, is the honest answer to it, unfortunately. We've got a few ideas, and a couple of ideas that were shared by our co-founders, Jeff and Richard. You recall, Sam, back in 2020, around that there will be a bit of a change from students. Like we feel, well, it actually looks like in the data that we've seen that university enrolment in both New Zealand and Australia has hit its peak in the last year or two. And it's kind of following a long trend from America. We're kind of 5 to 10 years behind where America are on a few things and a few trends in the grad space. And it seems like we've hit that peak. So there's a bit of a drop off from that. So it might be the number of just students available to go to university. But it can also be, we've kind of got, like, there's YouTube University, right? There's the students can jump, or people can jump online and kind of learn most things from YouTube now. So we're kind of seeing this democratization, I guess, of the education space, and where all the education was under lock and key in a library at a university in previous decades. That's not the case anymore. And students are savvy to that, especially students who have grown up with mobile devices in their hands, and they are able to get information and learn on a bunch of stuff at a drop of a hat. So, but again, that's hypothesizing. yeah, we've got a few ideas there.
Yeah, even some of the employers in the chat have also pointed out too. I think Kate said, uni's expensive, and there are other ways to enter the job market. For example, boot camps, into tech, for example. And yeah, if imagine you're a student, and you see the likes of Elon Musk saying, "Hey, Tesla, we don't care if you've got a university degree anymore. You just got to show passion and things like that." It'll change people's signals about what they think they should be doing. I got a friend who wants to get into cybersecurity, for example, and rather than going and doing a 4-year course, he's just going to do a quick 6-month, 12-month course at a technical institute instead. So there's just dearth of options there. I think you're right, Grant.
Interesting.
Yeah, let's keep moving. I reckon we'll come back to some of these questions. Let's hope not engineers and doctors. Very true, Melissa. I think there's some degrees potentially will remain very, very important. Yeah, we'll come back to some of those questions.
I don't think I'm going to be going to a doctor anytime soon that's got their degree from YouTube uni. That's for sure. Cool. So let's move on, but we can pick up that conversation a little bit later if we've got time. So one thing that we've, like Sam very eloquently put, we've been obviously seeing this trend for the last few months in terms of the application rate decreasing, and we've been hearing from employers it's more of a candidates market, they've got more options, etc. So we started to do some digging and some analysis and trying to pick up some interesting trends that are going on in the space. So, and the one thing that we turned to was and a big thank you to our friends at AEG for putting together they put together a plethora of surveys every year. The one survey we thought would be interesting to delve into is the candidate survey. So for context and for those who aren't familiar with this survey, and or for AEG, just that's the Australian Association of Graduate Employers. I think most people will know that, but some may not. So we put together the data of the last 6 years, so from 2017 to 2022. And these are sent out, so this survey, the candidate survey, is sent out to successfully hired candidates who have accepted jobs at the likes of your Big Four and engineering firms and so on. And also, as a quick note, Sam, I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier on, that we don't have access to the NZ data, or the NZAG don't do as a comprehensive of a survey as this. So we're just relying on the AEG data today. So apologies to my Kiwi friends online. But in saying that, a lot of the trends really hold sway in what we're seeing as well. So I'll walk through that. A lot of the trends hold sway in New Zealand, I mean. Cool. So let's start unpacking it. So look, this candidate survey, there's dozens and dozens of questions. So we haven't put it all together for you because it would be a very, very long webinar. So we plucked out the most interesting trends that we've seen. And the first one, first cab off the rank, is that what we found is that students are, generally speaking, less engaged. So what I mean by that is when these candidates ask the question, which of the following activities have you experienced during your time at university? So we've mapped this data back to 2018. That was the first time that this question was being asked in the survey. And we've indexed the data to 100. So just to keep as a good starting point per se. And yeah, as you can see, some really interesting trends here. I don't know if people can see my mouse actually, maybe not. I'm trying to hover over and it doesn't work. But nonetheless, so you can see that on the graph, voluntary work had a really big spike in 2019. That's dropped off a little bit. Part-time and casual work has actually stayed quite the same. Students are still doing part-time casual work whilst at university. A couple of the bigger decreases is the yellow line. You can see the vacation, clerkship or internships. There's basically less students participating in those programs. Whether or not they're active in a student society, which is the pale blue, teal, pick your poison, that line there, that's also dropping a little bit as well. So as I said, that what we've picked from this is that, yeah, students are generally speaking a little bit less engaged in their career search and at university, and finding, getting that relevant experience. Now, unfortunately, we've seen quite a big drop-off of student engagement on job boards, on the university job boards in particular, and career fairs. So the blue line is tracking back to 2016, where students or these candidates were asked, do you use the following services? So University Careers Job Board, there's actually a 21% decrease in those past 6 years, and a staggering 36% of students, like a decrease in students attending university career fairs as well. So quite a big drop, and we're kind of seeing this trend in New Zealand as well. I mean, just speaking to the Grad New Zealand data, we're seeing a huge increase year on year. Whilst there's less students in the New Zealand job market and applying for less roles, we've actually seen quite a substantial increase again in New Zealand. And that might be a few things. It might be we've identified that there's sometimes a bit of a clunky user experience on some of these like centralized university job boards. So they tend to, if the student doesn't get the information that they need there, or if they're not using the platform correctly, they go to Google or they go to Grad New Zealand and start searching for work. So a couple of interesting little trends on that front. And I personally, I found this slide a little bit concerning, that students are feeling less prepared for their job search as well. And this is stuff that we can potentially help out with as well down the track. We've got a number of things in the works here in terms of employability courses and whatnot that we're working with a number of universities on. But nonetheless, this is, as I said, it's quite a concerning trend. So in 2018, students were asked, to what extent did your university prepare you for your job search, like whether they prepared you extremely well for a number of factors. So the blue is the application process, so researching the roles, trying to understand who you're going to apply for and why. Red being just in general your job search, and the yellow line, the yellow data being the general grad recruitment process. So like, for example, interviews and assessment centres and so on. Quite a big decline on that front as well. So universities they've got their work cut out. And what's interesting is we know that universities have put more emphasis. Sam, we were just chatting earlier that a lot of your uni partners are putting more emphasis on employability. So it's kind of not in sync with the effort and the resources they're putting into employability in this space.
Most definitely. I think if we do have many universities on the call right now, they'd be like, we're trying. Like, I'm working quite closely, for example, doing some work at UNSW at the moment, the business school, on these really cool courses that show employability and all that sort of different stuff, and have access to it. Like, it's not with, I don't think it's without effort. It's just, I think, speaking on behalf of universities, I think they're having the same challenge as employers. They're pulling your hair. How do you get students to engage in this? How do you get them to find the jobs or find these great resources that we have going? It's a new, really big challenge in this, particularly this generation.
Yeah, it definitely is. And a question that I'm sure will pop up is, well, maybe this is affected because of the pandemic, because the pandemic started to roll out in 2020. 2020 data is actually the prior year, so the 2019 candidates, so before COVID was a thing. Oh, how we wish for those days. Another question was asked was how, well, there's a couple of questions asked in this deck. One being the number, or what type of websites were being used by students. So as you will all be familiar with, your employment websites, your own career site, I should say, is always top of the charts on this front. And then that's closely followed by the likes of Grad Australia, Grad Connection. Interestingly, we've seen a slight increase in Seek and Indeed, not in terms of usage, but becoming a little bit more useful to students, which is good. So there's more resources out there. So that's on just here. So candidates rather also ask the question, of these platforms and job boards, which are most useful? So we've seen a slight increase in there in Seek and Indeed as well. Grad Connection, Grad Australia kind of holding sway. About 50% of students are finding them very useful. What about social media? It's a hot topic. I was on an NZAG call a week or two ago, and we're talking about TikTok and all these different apps and that you can now engage with students on social media. If I start off with the Whirlpool graduate forums, I remember back in the day when I was a graduate, I was using those forums to find out, application open and closing dates and whatnot. That's declined a little bit. They've lost a little bit of market share and engagement there. LinkedIn has increased significantly. So over the past 5 years or so from around 25% up to 47% now of students find that platform useful or really useful. And I think that's kind of driven by a couple of things. By universities are now encouraging more students to create LinkedIn profiles and whatnot, and also employers. I know that a lot of employers mentioned to me that it's like the bane of their existence of having like students reach out left, right, and centre on LinkedIn with messages and whatnot. But it is a good platform to engage with students, and that's becoming increasingly so that's showing in the data. So now we get into some real nitty-gritty around. So again, these students were asked, why did you decline an offer? And you can see on the far left-hand side here, the ranking that we've ranked all the reasons by importance. So from 1 at the top down to 10, and from 2019 across to 2022, so the past 4 years. What's interesting is you can see that quality of work and what you've actually been doing on the job has remained somewhat consistent across the board. 2019, 2020 was the top reasons. I've highlighted in green the compensation and benefits. And there's actually been quite a big jump in the amount of students who are saying that they're actually less likely to accept an offer that has poor pay. So it's basically more important to them when accepting offers. And again, if I refer back to some conversations I had recently, that there's a lot of chatter around, especially in the trading firms in Australia, there's a lot of chatter around Discord and whatnot. I think my colleague Jeremy was talking about this, that there's Discord channels of students actually jumping in and discussing pay and options and whatnot. So pay is definitely becoming more important, and this was last year, and personally, I believe this is going to become increasingly important in future years as well. So pay is becoming a more important factor. And then they are also asked what factors would lead you to actually stay longer within the organisation. So an increasing pay is actually a staying factor as well. So we've seen that jump from in 2016, where it was ranked by importance at number 8. And that's moved all the way up to the number 4 most important thing in 2022. What's interesting as well here is that they actually care less about the variety of work. So that calls into question things like rotation programs and or that might be. Maybe that's less important to this generation coming through. The data sort of pointing to that as well. We'll move on. In the interest of time, feel free to take notes, but as I said, we'll be sharing all these slides with you afterwards as well. So again, students were then asked the question, what's the main reason to actually join your employer, like the employer that you've successfully been hired at? And what's interesting here is it's a little bit contradictory, right? Is students are actually saying that compensation and benefits aren't actually as important. So on one hand, they're saying that it's very important when they're declining the offer, but as I said, it's contradictory because they're saying that, I mean, in 2021 and 2022, it actually wasn't even ranked high here. So super interesting, and pick the eyes out of that one. Good luck in terms of understanding why that's the case. And a few theories, but drop some theories in the chat there. So opportunity for career progression is, generally speaking, number 1 or number 2, and the same for the training and development. We see this a lot in our grad reviews, for example, that we publish. We've got now thousands of graduate reviews on our sites, and we always see that students are very interested in both the culture and the training and development at each company. And I know for a lot of recruiters as well, that's asked quite a lot in interviews and that, in terms of, what sort of training programs, development programs are you going to put through me? Because at the end of the day, students, whilst they like to think it, they know they're not the finished article when they graduate from university, and they know they've got a lot of development needs. So that comes out in this data as well. Pretty interesting. Candidates were also asked what's the main reason for aspiring to work for this employer. And yeah, again, so in summary, students are saying that salary isn't important as other factors when deciding to work or to join a specific workplace. So students declining offers with higher pay, with lower pay, as I said before, but the pay is increasing as a staying factor as well. But students aren't really admitting to it being a joining factor, which I find fascinating. We all know this one, that students are reneging on offers more often. We hear it anecdotally in our catch-ups and NZAG and AG roundtables and whatnot. The reneges are increasing year on year. And that's, again, prevalent very much so in the data. So it's up to, in Australia, it's up to a 17% renege rate in 2021, which is up 5% from 12% in 2016. So quite a big jump.
That's self-reported too. That's them saying, yes, they did it, rather they might have.
It's true. Yeah, that's very true. So another interesting trend here with, and we've seen this amongst our clients of late as well, that as Sam very articulately put, there's less students applying for less roles, there's more graduate employers. So employers are now saying, well, what can we do to increase this talent pool? And we've got some ideas a little bit later on and some top tips that we think might work in this space. But one thing that I know a few of my clients have pivoted to very quickly is starting to recruit or open up applications for international students as well. So that was not very popular in the past, and you can see that in the data here. However, there is a trend in the upwards direction where more employers are accepting and hiring more international students or students that require a PR or sponsorship. So I've been talking for a little bit, so I'll ask a question to the audience. Are you hiring international students? And if so, are you hiring them for the first time this year? So you can open up the chat box and pop in a yes or no. As I said, feel free to be anonymous, and if you don't want to give away your trade secrets. What are you hearing in this space, Sam?
If I can unmute myself. Yeah, definitely. Like I won't name names, but hearing from a few employers who have always told me, no, just citizen and PR. There's a few big names who have said, yeah, we're taking on international students now. Some big hirers as well, not just the fact that they're big names, but they're taking on significant amount of students too. Particularly, and I see a few clients in there who are saying not yet. It's definitely, obviously for government, it's very tricky. So federal government, that's not going to change anytime soon. But in the private sector, I definitely think it's a topic that you should be at least discussing internally. Because that, as we said before, the commencing rate of students, right, that's not actually improving. And while there might be some short-term factors in terms of how, for want of a better term, how frothy the market is at the moment, how many roles there are right now, that might subside potentially. I don't think we're going to get back to a similar level of being an employer's market like we've had previously. So it should be on the cards, I feel.
And just judging by the chat, Sam, it looks like it is on the cards for a few. So Kate, for example, saying that they've never done it before, but they're considering it and looking at options. And there's a few that are dropping in saying yes as well, that they're hiring international students, a lot of them saying that they've done it in the past, and some saying yes for the first time.
A great point by Kelly and Ellen, saying that visa holders can be even better than domestic employees in terms of the long-term staying factor. Like there's a lot of loyalty there for taking that punt and helping them through that process, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it's true. Cool. We'll move on because we want to get to some of your questions, and I can see a couple in the chat as well. So, what are the key takeaways from this session, I guess? So, and there's a few, but we've kind of narrowed down our top 5 here, and excuse the weird formatting here. I'm not sure what's gone in my slide deck here, but nonetheless, we'll roll with it. So, as Sam said, there's fewer students applying for fewer jobs. We've kind of done that to death. I mean, anecdotally, we've done, so we've been doing a lot of user testing. Sam, you alluded to this earlier, where we're doing a lot of user testing for students who are currently searching for jobs, and we're picking up some really interesting trends. I mean, one that springs to mind is this female, I think she was studying business or accounting, and she was looking for jobs in the banking sector. And she's now opted out of the process, and she's looking at some different options and not like traditional graduate programs. And my colleague asked, why? Like, why have you opted out? What's happened here? And she said, well, I applied for the job, but then I actually got taken to this recruitment process, and I kind of figured it was going to be an hour or two of psychometric testing and so on and so forth, and just felt like a lot of effort. So she opted out. She just said, look, this just isn't for me. So I think there's some interesting learnings that we can pick up on there. There's been a very big increase. Again, we spoke about this earlier. Very big increase in the number of employers hiring graduates. I mean, 30% in Australia is huge. 70% in New Zealand. So this is creating what we call a supply squeeze. Fewer students and increased demand. Money matters to Gen Z. It matters a lot. There was a really interesting, and I might link this in the show notes per se in the webinar or in the email afterwards, that there was a really interesting study done by a lady called Sarah Weiss, and she's put together, an American lady, and she's put together a lot of really interesting data around. It's called BIXA research, if you want to Google it away now. On Generation Z and what motivates them, basically, like how to market to Gen Z students. And the biggest takeaway was, and I remember this story because stories resonate with me quite a lot. She was saying that when they were actually going out to and like kind of recruiting Gen Zers for this survey and research and study, they were all these Gen Z students were saying, well, if I can, I'll get paid, say, $100 for an hour of my time or of my fee. So that's all good. But then they were saying, well, if I bring along a friend, or do I get a referral bonus or of like 10% or something, or if I can, for example, do it for an hour and a half instead of an hour, can I get paid a little bit more? So the point being is they were really hustling for the extra dollar. And that might be because of the age group. There could be a lot of reasons as to why that's the case. But she was hypothesizing that the reason why that might be the case is because their prioritizations have changed compared to millennials. Millennials were we are very much driven by like feeling and, wanting to have an impact within an organization and whatnot. Gen Z's very money savvy, and more salary driven than previous generations. So again, I'll share that research in the notes as well, because it's really, really interesting, and there's a very succinct sort of hour podcast where she talks to that. Students are also feeling just less prepared in the job search. That came out quite a bit in the previous slides as well. And last but not least, I think there's an opportunity for employers to rethink their recruitment process, like I just spoke about, of the female student that was applying for jobs in the banking sector. I think there's an opportunity to potentially thin out the recruitment process and make it simpler and easier for students to apply for your jobs and express their interest and test and go from there. So, well, that brings me into the next point. So, what are our top tips? And Sam, feel free to dive in here, but because we've shortened it down to 4, but there could be a few here. Like I just said, very big opportunity to shorten the recruitment process. We're seeing that a lot of students are opting out of that, and opting more. They're going to small, medium employers where there's one interview and they get hired, as opposed to bigger recruitment programs and assessment centres and whatnot.
And I think it's I can understand from a lot of employers there as well that the length of the recruitment process. I'm sure many of you might not have, right? Like that it is a long process. I'm talking to you all the time. You're like, yeah, we know it's a long process, but we've got so many applications. We've got to get through them somehow, right? And that's particularly for typically teams that are small, won't have the largest team resources, things like that. You got to get through it somehow with the limited capacity. But yeah, I think there's a real opportunity there to really think about that process. That might have made sense in an employer's market, but we are definitely in the candidates market. And I think to the point that about that particular grad, that story that you were making before, Grant, like the length is not just that it's the time commitment as well. It's the level of like impersonal feedback they're getting through that process as well. I mean, even personally, when I graduated 2018, applied for a few grad programs. I burnt out very quickly, just because you wouldn't even get to that discussion stage, and just looked for roles that were very much able to talk very much directly with an employer straight on. So huge opportunity there, I think, for us to think about that as an industry.
Turned out well for you and Prosper.
Yeah, worked out right.
Just to be biased. Yeah, so there is an opportunity to increase salary. We're seeing this. I mentioned anecdotally in terms of Discord forums and whatnot. That's blowing up now. There's more students are more focused on this, and we saw this in the data as well, the AG data, where students were declining offers with lower pay as well. You can expand your talent pool. This is one that Sam and I were very passionate about. We spoke about this at the AG conference last year, didn't we, Sam, when we were talking about, do you need a university degree to work within your organisation, or do you start opening up applications to Tafe students, which is popular especially in trades, but construction and engineering and so on. But there's also like digital academies like General Assembly and MOOCs as well, massive online open courses. The students are learning from different ways and taking alternative education pathways, I guess. So there is an opportunity there to start expanding the horizons a little bit and accepting offers from students who don't come just from the atypical university pathway. And last but not least, and this came out quite a bit in that anecdotal data with the ranking of importance before in the candidate survey, where career progression and learning and development is just so important for students. I mean, yes, we've spoken a little bit about the salary side of things, but it still matters a lot to students, the development that you're going to be put into them and the overall career progression. So really highlight that in either your job ads or on your Grad Australia profile or wherever you're advertising, right? It doesn't matter. It's the point being, highlight that content and really show the students that you care about this space and you care about their development and you're going to put in a lot of time to it. And then, so that's the development side of things, and the career side of things, like what comes next after being a graduate accountant. What are the next steps that they can take to go up into a partner or become a specialist or remote be? I think that's an opportunity there as well.
100%. And the way you do that, I think, is changing too. I think Kelly's made a really great point again in the chat that potentially lack of interaction with employers over the last few years meant that students are hearing about this less, and so why salary might be more of playing factor. And I think just the way that Gen Z are interacting more broadly is fundamentally changing. Like even here at Prospel, we're doing a complete review of how content's developed and what content is needed for Generation Z. We've done reviews and day in the life for the longest time, and they've worked fantastically. But we all, as a company ourselves, we need to make sure we're on the front foot and understanding what it is Gen Z and how they want to hear about something like this career progression and L&D, because it's important and it's changing how students are looking for that.
And not to play favourites, but I will for a second, because Taylor from Prospel as well and our New Zealand team raises a good point that for the first time in my life anyway, inflation is a huge concern. I mean, the data came out in the US this week. It was something like 10%. And I mean, in New Zealand, Australia, we're kind of saying 3 to 4%, but kind of all know that that's not the case as well, especially the asset prices like housing and whatnot. So like these factors, it's in the news, they're more connected to news than they ever have before. Because they've grown up with mobile devices basically bolted to their hands. So they're accessing, this information like that. And so if they see inflation, they're thinking money. They're thinking, okay, well, if I want to buy a house in the next 10 years, what do I need to do to get there? So that could be quite a big factor in this as well. Thanks, Taylor. Love the inflation chat. Oh, and you did link that study in the chat as well, Sam. Thanks for that.
Yep.
Perfect. All right, let's. We've got a couple more minutes left. Actually, we're going a little bit over time. We said 45 minutes, but Sam and I are overly chatty. We are in sales, so
yeah,
to be expected. Questions? Any specific questions in the audience, Sam? You want to dive into?
There's a few I'll backtrack to, but there's a question here from Corey about the what's causing the increase of employers taking more graduates.
You want to tackle this one, or shall I?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I just saw a funny comment from Diane about crypto. It's a great question. To be honest, I think actually everyone in the chat will be able to answer this better than Grant and I to a degree, but I think it's an element of lack of international mobility. Has meant that particularly your mid to senior level hiring has, there's been a lot of movement in mid to senior level positions. So there's a bit of a talent, there's that whole talk about that great resignation and things like that. So there's a lot of people moving around at the moment, right? And so that market, mid to senior level hiring is, like we're talking how tough grad market is, that is just ridiculous, that area at the moment. Poaching, lots of stuff that's happening, and that just flows down, right? Like it flows down. So if your company's growing, and there's a lot of businesses that are growing throughout COVID, you're growing, and you've got that talent gap in that mid to senior level because of all this movement going on. What's the natural progression, right? It's to the next level down, the entry level roles, and hence why grad programs, I think, have been such a huge increase in the roles hiring. But plus there's also, I think that back to the number of employers in the market, that's I think why answers why there's more roles being hired for. But the answer to why there's maybe more employers hiring graduates as well, again, a lot of growth, a lot of organizations realizing for the first time that maybe they need more tech students, for example. They've got big growth in that tech space and digitization of the world. And so they're looking for young talent to train up. Yeah, I'll be curious if anyone, particularly anyone who recruits for more than just uni students, who's on our call, could probably comment to a greater degree than I've just done. But I think it's a level of that flowing through. Plus, then you got government who's gone through a pandemic, and so there's been a big, I think, strategic push from the government to make sure young people are being hired and things like that. So there's policy decisions that come with it too. But again, it's a bit of the perfect storm. Maybe perfect's not the right word for it because it doesn't feel like perfect for everyone on call right now. But it's just all of these factors combined together. It's just really set this market.
Yeah, well put, Sam. A question from Josh in the chat. It's a good one. Are there more high school students looking at trades, apprenticeships, and Tafe rather than university? Josh, we actually haven't had a chance to look into that data. The data at Tafe level is a little bit more dispersed, as opposed to this the the centralized data that DESI do. What's
DESI.
the acronym?
Yeah, DESI. Yep,
DESI. That DESI do every year. So that's an interesting project for us to pull together on for future for sure. We'd love to know that.
Oops, sorry, Grant.
Go on.
I was going to say that there was also a question a bit earlier as well about the number of students who might want to go traveling as well. And again, we don't have that data as of yet, but it might be something potentially we could sort of looked into, because I know what we're doing a lot of at the moment at Prospor is we're actually doing a lot of user testing with our students, and like talking to students at the moment, more than just like surveys, because surveys I think can only tell so much. We might want to really actually get in the nitty-gritty with them and really try and understand their common pain points, what they're thinking and stuff like that at the moment. So it'll be anecdotal, that evidence that comes out of it, I think, for the most part, but it's probably a good sort of area to explore, I feel.
Yeah. Cool. Should we
any other
leave
questions?
things there? There are a couple of other questions, so we can go on for a couple more minutes. Joshua actually chimed in to say that they're looking more at the high school leavers as well. I think that's another opportunity to start targeting high school students, and I know that a number of organisations have started to roll out apprenticeship programs to basically hire then train, and that's becoming increasingly popular, that hire and then train model.
Yep, I think it's a great point by Melissa as well. There's still in fact, we actually made this point back at the AAG conference last year. There, even within Australia, where we have, I'm sure NZ's the same as well, where we have these, we've got HEX, we've got these support, and we've got these plenty of university scholarships. There is still a fundamental structural disadvantages that exist why an Australian student, like an Australian domestic citizen, might not go to university. And so international students are a massive opportunity that we should be tapping. But it's a great point by Melissa as well, that there is also opportunity within the domestic audience, potentially by supporting a student, whether it be a scholarship or something like that, maybe from high school, to go and do their studies as well. So I don't think there's one golden bullet necessarily, but there's talent out there. It's just where are we looking and how are we looking? I think it's the big thing we need to challenge ourselves on.
Most definitely. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for your kind comments in the chat. Thank you. Yeah, as I said, we will be sharing both the slide deck and plus a couple of extra little treats in there as well once we get them, and it's recording as well.
Definitely. And Sonia, I saw there's a question about if you can't increase your pay, what do we do? Let's talk about that at our next catch up, because I think specifically about ABS, but I think the fact that that final point, the learning and development, the career progression opportunities, that's what we really need to highlight in that scenario. And I think, we to my point from before, we need to rethink how we're doing that, both at Prospor and as yourselves as well. Is dot points on a website this is the way we need to do that anymore? I don't think that's the case. I think it needs to be in a much more interactive and engaging way for this new generation who are expecting that. Something that can capture is a point we haven't made yet, but the attention spans of this generation, where you've got constant information coming through, is you got to get them in half a second or so.
8 seconds. They have an 8-second attention span.
Yep.
Compared to millennials, which is I think 15%.
Yeah. So we've got to think how do we get that in the first instance? I don't have all the answers. We don't have all the answers to it just yet. I think it's something we need to look through. Yeah.
Well wrapped up, Sam. As you said, we don't have all the answers. We wish we did. And apologies for just sharing all this data on you all. And as I said, we've got a few solutions there. But hopefully you found this session really useful. And look, if you are struggling with applications, that type of stuff, I mean, there's things that we can do to help, of course. But I know a lot of my clients Vaster, we put together a blog a month or two ago as well. And, like, share this stuff with your colleagues internally as well. Not as an excuse for applications being low, because it could be a variety of reasons, right? But hopefully it gives you another sort of thing at the toolkit to help you with those internal discussions, as opposed to the knock on the door from the manager saying, why are applications down 30% year on year? Because we know that's been happening a little bit as well. So hopefully this has been a really useful session for you all, and you got a lot out of it.
Awesome. Well, should we wrap it up there? Great. I reckon. I don't think there's any more questions coming through. Thanks everyone for your time today, for your questions and for your engagement, and thanks Grant for the session.
All right. Cool, there. Enjoy long weekend, everyone. Happy Easter. Hopefully the Easter Bunny comes to you all. You don't believe in the Easter Bunny, Sam?
Oh, maybe a little bit.
Looking forward to the chalky egg hunt on the weekend that we've got organised. All right.
Cool.
See everyone. Bye for now.